The doctor's words echoed in my ears, cold and final. 3 days. That was all they gave me, 3 days to close the book on a life carefully built, only to watch it slip through my fingers. The diagnosis wasn't the part that haunted me. What stayed with me was Evan's expression the moment the doctor stepped out. Relief. Bare, unfiltered relief. He didn't bother to hide it. Finally, it's mine. His tone was steady, almost serene. That same tone he used as a child whenever he claimed something he believed belonged to him. Hearing it again made something deep in my chest twist. To him, I wasn't a father in those moments. Just an obstacle between him and what he believed he deserved: inheritance status power. No amount of rationalizing could quiet the echo of his certainty. Later that evening, after the rest of the family drifted out and the silence grew heavy, Daniel appeared for his usual evening check. The old butler paced more than usual, fingers fidgeting, gaze flicking to me like he was wrestling with a secret. "Richard," he murmured, stopping beside the bed. "Something doesn't feel right about your health. It doesn't add up. And I'm worried you might not be the only one in danger." That pulled my attention more than anything had in days. Daniel wasn't prone to dramatic warnings. "What are you trying to say?" My voice scraped out thin and worn. His hesitation spoke volumes. "Your son," he said. "I don't like what I've been seeing. The girl at the pharmacy, he's been meeting her too often, too privately. And there's something else. Something calculated in the way he acts around you lately. It feels like he's playing a game. A game." The word hit harder than the diagnosis. Suspicion had lingered in the back of my mind for months, but hearing Daniel speak it aloud made the truth sharper, more dangerous. Evan wasn't just impatient for his inheritance, he was orchestrating something. And whatever it was, he intended to win. Sleep escaped me that night. The weight settled across my chest, pressing until breathing felt like work. By morning, a decision had already formed, slowly, painfully, but solid. Protection would have to come from foresight, not hope. Proof was necessary. Hard evidence. Otherwise, Evan could twist the narrative, the law, even my own failing health to his advantage. A visit to the clinic came first. The doctor took the samples without question, promised preliminary results soon. No explanations were offered, none were needed. The blood test was only the beginning. A safeguard. A way to confirm what instinct had been screaming for weeks. Stepping out of the clinic, a cold heaviness settled over me. The air tasted metallic, the sky a dull sheet. Too much remained uncertain. Too many lines blurred. The days after my diagnosis blurred together in a haze of quiet dread. 3 days, they said. 3 days. But it wasn't just the reality of my illness that gnawed at me. It was the suspicion growing inside that perhaps this wasn't about age or some natural decline. There was a deeper, darker reason for the weakness creeping through my body. Weeks of unease had settled into my bones, but it wasn't until Daniel appeared unannounced that the pieces began to align. His steps echoed along the marble floor, familiar, yet weighted with something different. The usual calm on his face had vanished. "Richard," he began, voice steady, but edged with tension. "You should take another look at your health. Something doesn't add up." Daniel was never one to speak without reason. That alone sent a shiver up my spine. The papers in front of me suddenly seemed pointless. "What exactly are you saying, Daniel?" He hesitated, as though tasting every word before offering it. "This doesn't look like age catching up with you. The symptoms, they point to something else." A cold possibility surfaced. Poison, the word barely whispering past my lips. Bitter, absurd, and yet it fit. The racing heart, random spells of dizziness, the strange fatigue that clung to me. Daniel didn't deny it. His eyes flicked with real concern. A blood test might answer what we can't. His suggestion lingered like smoke. Instinct, or perhaps fear, confirmed something had gone terribly wrong. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. You need to consider Evan. The way he speaks to that girl at the pharmacy. The secrecy. The frequency. There's something unsettling there. My chest tightened. Evan. My son. My heir. The distance he'd been keeping. The oddly timed questions about my estate. The strained smiles. Everything sharpened into a new, darker shape. Daniel went on, choosing each word carefully. Sometimes desperation pushes people to extremes. Lately he seems eager to claim what's his. The room felt smaller with each breath. Entitlement had always been part of Evan's nature, but this hinted at malice. A darker ambition I hadn't wanted to see. A pit formed in my stomach as months of suspicion coalesced into something almost solid. Whatever was happening wasn't an accident, and the greatest threat to my life might be the person who should have been protecting it. Daniel's voice nudged me out of my spiraling thoughts. Whatever is going on, we need to move quickly. This is bigger than you think. He was right. The empire I had built, my family, my legacy, was rotting from within, and the rot wore my son's face. The next morning, a decision formed before my feet hit the floor. Testing was the only logical step. Proof would be my shield. If Evan truly believed his plan was unfolding without resistance, he would soon learn otherwise. A discreet visit to the clinic followed. No announcements, no explanations. The nurse drew the blood, indifferent to anything beyond her routine. The whole procedure felt chillingly impersonal, as though my unraveling life were just another file in their system. Walking out, a hollow ache settled beneath my ribs. How had everything gone so wrong? How had the boy I raised learned to sharpen knives behind my back? Loneliness crept beside me like a shadow. No one could understand this, not truly. The betrayal cut too deep, the fear too sharp. But letting him win was not an option. It came in the form of a small, almost insignificant detail, a snippet of a conversation that shouldn't have been caught. A slip, really. But in that moment, everything I suspected about Evan and his girlfriend became undeniable. I had asked Daniel to install a few hidden cameras just in case. He was skeptical at first, but he trusted me. He knew the danger lurking in the house, the way Evan had been behaving, the strange coldness in his eyes, whenever he thought no one was watching. The kind of coldness I hadn't seen in him before. One evening, as I sifted through the footage from the previous day, I came across something chilling. Evan sitting in the living room speaking to his girlfriend, Michelle. They didn't know the cameras were rolling. Once he's gone. Evan's voice was low, almost a whisper. I'll be free. I'll have it all. It's about time. Michelle's voice followed, hesitant, but eager. Are you sure? What if someone finds out? Evan let out a bitter laugh. What difference does it make? He's not going to last much longer. A few more days, maybe less. After that, it'll all be mine. It felt like the ground slipped from beneath me. The words rang in my ears, sharp cutting. He was talking about me, about killing me. A strange calm settled over me as I listened to the rest of the conversation. There was no hesitation in his voice, only the assurance that I was a pawn, and my death was the final step in a game I never realized I was part of. Are you sure the poison will work? Michelle asked, her voice quivering, but Evan's tone didn't falter. It'll work, he replied. The doctor's already prepared it. He thinks it's for something else, but it's perfect. It's a slow, quiet thing. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. I could feel the blood draining from my face as the reality of it all set in. He had been poisoning me, little by little over time, and now he was making plans to finish what he had started. My stomach churned as I rewound the footage. Over and over I listened to those words. It's perfect. The room felt suffocating, still letting him see how deeply this cut into me wasn't an option. Evan didn't deserve that power. The laptop snapped shut beneath my hands, the sound sharp enough to steady the trembling in my chest. Anger burned hot, but underneath it sat something much heavier, a betrayal so deep it threatened to hollow me out. Falling apart now would only hand him the victory he was already reaching for. The next moves mattered. Preparation was everything. Evan had shown his hand, so the counterplay needed to be deliberate, calculated, merciless. He believed death was creeping toward me. Little did he know that illusion would become the very weapon used against him. And so the long game began. Dr. Phillips's number glowed on the screen. Trusting him had never been difficult. He had treated me for years, had seen me through more than most. "Dr. Phillips," I said once he answered, keeping my voice level despite the emotional storm clawing through me. "I need your help with something delicate. I need to stage a death." Silence pressed between us, brief but heavy. Then his calm, measured tone followed. "We can do that, but it must be convincing. Everyone will need to believe it, especially Evan." A slow breath left me. "Good. I need him certain he's won." "We'll take care of it," he assured. The call ended, leaving a moment where the plan settled over me like armor. This wasn't simply deception, it was strategy. Evan needed to feel triumphant, untouchable. Only then would he reveal the full extent of his betrayal. Only then could I strike back. Daniel's number was next. The old man answered in a heartbeat. "Prepare yourself," I said. "It's time. We're moving forward." No hesitation from him, not even for a second. "Understood. I'll begin the arrangements." In the background, faint sound suggested he was already pacing, planning shifting into the role he had mastered over decades. His loyalty had always been unshakable, one of the few constants left in my life. The rain poured that night, a heavy, relentless downpour that soaked the streets and left the air thick with moisture. It was the perfect night for what I had planned. A storm was coming both outside and in my life. But at that moment, I was calm. I had to be. Everything was set. The hospital staff had been briefed. The paperwork was prepared, and the will was in place, signed and notarized. The entire facade needed to be flawless, every detail down to the smallest thing. The doctor, Dr. Phillips, had agreed to administer the final dose of the drug that would mimic death enough to send my heart rate into the range of what would be considered clinically dead. The idea was simple. I would be pronounced dead, Evan would believe it, and the game would begin. The family and friends arrived as expected in a flurry of concern and false grief. They gathered around the sterile hospital room, watching the staff with anxious eyes. The somber atmosphere was exactly what I needed. I lay there still and cold, pretending to be gone, knowing that this was only the beginning. Evan stood at the foot of my bed, his face a mask of feigned sorrow. He didn't know. He didn't suspect that I could still hear everything. I could feel the tension in his every movement, the way his hand twitched like he wanted to reach out but didn't. He had always been a little too eager, too ready to take what wasn't his, and now he was waiting for the moment he thought he had earned. "Goodbye, old man," he muttered under his breath as he left the room, his voice laced with the bitterness of victory. It was the perfect lie, and it worked. Evan believed it. Everyone believed it. I was gone, but I wasn't. Not really. The next few days passed in a blur. A strange sense of calm surrounded me as I watched from the shadows, monitoring everything that went on. My own funeral took place, an event that I watched unfold as a passive observer. My body was there lying in the casket, but my mind was sharp, my eyes wide open, and my plan was set into motion. A few days later, I received news that made my stomach drop. I had been expecting it, but hearing it still shook me to my core. Evan and Michelle, his girlfriend, had taken matters into their own hands. They were meeting in a dimly lit parking garage, pressuring the other heirs to sign over the rights to my estate. The way they talked, the urgency in their voices, it was clear that they thought they had won. Just sign it. It's not like we have time to waste. Michelle's voice cracked as she spoke. This needs to be done before anyone finds out. Evan's response was almost a growl. Once we have the paperwork, everything's ours. We'll be free. My blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to inherit what was mine, they were trying to make it official. It wasn't enough to let the will play out in the courts. They were taking the law into their own hands. Letting Evan believe he had already won was out of the question. Not when the shift in power was finally within reach. Steps had to be taken quickly. The first was the recording. Daniel had suggested a safety net that immediately became the backbone of the plan. A hidden microphone now sat in the office, ready to capture every whispered scheme between Evan and Michelle as they plotted to strip me of everything. Their confidence would be their undoing, because the moment they felt securely in control was the moment the trap would spring shut. Early the next morning, the garage door stood half open, and from a distance their silhouettes came into view. Evan and Michelle were locked in heated conversation beside the car, desperation bleeding into every gesture. Papers trembled in Evan's grip, just one signature away from finishing what they had started. A slow burn crawled up my chest as I watched them. Years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, decisions made for their futures, none of it mattered to them. All of it had been discarded the second temptation came calling. The betrayal ran deeper each time Evan's voice rose, convinced that wealth and power justified everything he was doing. Somewhere along the way, the boy I raised had vanished. What stood there now, calculating, hungry, unrecognizable, was everything I had hoped he'd never become. The weight of everything unfolding pressed harder each day, a pressure that seemed to settle into every corner of my mind. Preparation had done little to soften the blow. Betrayal coming from a stranger would have been easier to stomach. Coming from Evan, my son, cut far deeper. Each new piece of evidence reopened the same wound, refusing to let it heal. Years had gone into building this family, shaping a life meant to support them long after I was gone. Every sacrifice, every long night, every decision had been for their future. Now that future was being torn apart by the very person meant to inherit it. Watching Evan orchestrate my downfall calmly, confidently forced an uncomfortable truth to the surface. Somewhere along the way, the boy I raised had vanished. Memories of his childhood flickered through my thoughts. His smile, his eagerness to please, the way he once looked to me for direction. Those moments felt like relics from another lifetime. The man standing in his place now was driven by something colder than ambition. Greed had hollowed him out, leaving a stranger in my son's skin. While I struggled to make sense of it, events around me continued to escalate. News kept coming in, Evan pressing the other heirs to sign off on whatever papers he shoved in front of them, visits to their homes, whispered threats dressed up as promises. Daniel's updates confirmed everything. Evan wasn't simply preparing to inherit. He was pushing for absolute control, eager to strip away whatever dignity remained for anyone standing in his way. Time felt short. The charade surrounding my staged death was becoming harder to maintain, and the fear of slipping up lingered like a shadow. This had turned into a survival game, one where the threat didn't come from illness but from my own blood. Each tactic Evan employed pushed me a little closer to the edge. Anger simmered, ready to break through, but restraint was essential. Losing composure now would cost me everything. patience mattered more than pride. A move was necessary. Evidence had been gathered, the recordings from the office, the low whispers in the garage, the documents tying him and Michelle together. Each piece painted a clearer picture of just how far Evan was willing to go. Confrontation would happen, but it needed to be on my terms. The tension had been mounting for weeks. Every step of this twisted game pushed things closer to a collision neither of us could avoid. Evan believed the win was his victory, secured inheritance, guaranteed power, finally within reach. Confidence radiated off him, the kind that comes from thinking every piece on the board is under control. Watching him so certain cut deeper than expected. The sun, raised with love and endless patience, had vanished, replaced by someone colder, sharper, driven by a hunger that went far beyond simple greed. Betrayal carried a sting unlike anything endured before. This wasn't a child vying for approval or reassurance. This was a man who wanted to eradicate everything his father represented. Yet surrender wasn't an option. Not after everything at stake. The recordings, the documents, the evidence. Each piece had been gathered carefully, methodically. While Evan and Michelle tightened their grip on the other heirs, pushing them to sign away their rights, the trap silently took shape. They thought the victory was complete. They thought the game was over. Tonight would show them how wrong they were. Rain streaked across the windshield as the drive towards the final confrontation continued. The steady rhythm on the glass created an eerie sort of calm. A moment to acknowledge what had brought us here lies manipulation, entitlement, and a level of calculation unbecoming of any son. But the rot hadn't started in him alone. Allowing this to continue, ignoring the early signs, trusting blindly that was on me. The car rolled to a stop a safe distance from the meeting point. Darkness cloaked the parking lot as preparations were finalized. A hidden microphone in the coat pocket. The phone recording. Every safeguard ready. One last deep breath steadied the nerves before stepping into the night. A few minutes later, two silhouettes took shape near the old car, Evan and Michelle. Their hushed conversation carried just far enough. "We need the signatures," Michelle pressed, urgency tightening her tone. "Everything's ours once they sign. After that, no one can challenge it." Evan glanced around, paranoid but confident. "It's already done. Once this goes through, we own everything. By the time anyone figures it out, he'll be gone." The words chilled the air around him. Not even a hint of remorse crossed his voice. Only certainty. Still concealed in the shadows, it became crystal clear this was all the proof necessary. Their plan, spoken aloud without caution, sealed their fate. Michelle leaned in again. "You're sure no one will find out by the time they try?" Evan said with a smug tilt in his voice. "It'll be too late. Enough." A step forward broke through the darkness. Footsteps echoed. Both heads snapped in my direction. Evan's face drained of color as he stumbled back. "Dad," he choked out, shock warping his features. "You're alive." The question hung thick in the air. Did you really believe death would come that easily? Confusion twisted into panic, then into dread. He couldn't comprehend how the situation had flipped so quickly. Before he could reply, headlights cut through the rain. Several unmarked cars rolled in, surrounding the lot. Doors swung open. Agents stepped out, badges catching the dim light. Federal authorities. The final piece of the trap. Evan took a half step back, his voice cracking. This isn't real. You were supposed to be dead. How is this happening? How the distance closed between us?" "Because you underestimated the one person who knew you best." Agents moved in swiftly. Evan's bravado collapsed. His hands trembled as they cuffed him. Michelle tried to run, only to be stopped within seconds. Their scheme, months in the making, crumbled in less than a minute. No sense of triumph came with the moment. No satisfaction. only a hollow, heavy ache settling deep in the chest. Watching a son fall so completely, so publicly stripped away, any illusion left about who he had become. "Take them," came the quiet instruction. The agents nodded and did their job. Evan turned, once eyes hollow and bewildered, searching for something, understanding, forgiveness, rage. Whatever emotion lived behind that stare, it no longer mattered. That part of life was over. Turning away felt like closing the door on a life built over decades. Wealth could be rebuilt, power regained, but a son lost to greed and malice, that wound would never fully heal. Steps carried me away from the flashing lights, away from the shattered remains of what once resembled a family. I had lost a son. The moment the FBI escorted Evan away, a strange stillness settled in the air. Years of tension and sleepless nights had led to this outcome. Yet the sight of my son struggling against the officers didn't bring the satisfaction one might expect. His downfall wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy, a long, drawn-out collapse of the person I had once believed would carry on the family legacy. A lifetime had been dedicated to building an empire, crafting a future meant to support generations. Standing there watching Evan's world crumble, it became painfully clear how hollow those accomplishments felt, without trust, without loyalty, without the family that was supposed to stand beside me. Wealth held little meaning when the person meant to inherit it had turned it into a weapon. But beneath the grief and disappointment, something else began to settle, a recognition that the weight holding me down for so long had finally loosened. Seeing Evan's arrogance fall apart stripped away the fog of denial I had been living in. The truth stood bare. The man walking into the back of that FBI car wasn't the son I had raised. The child who once sought comfort in my arms had long disappeared. That realization forced a shift within me. The brokenness, the anger, the years of carrying the burden of a fractured relationship, they no longer had the same power. Something steadier replaced them: clarity, control, the sense that the path forward was no longer tangled in emotional obligation. Evidence lay secured: the recordings, the financial documents, the threads of manipulation woven between Evan and Michelle. Every piece had been collected with a purpose, yet the need for vengeance had faded. Justice had already taken its course. Adding more punishment wouldn't heal the wound his betrayal had carved. While standing alone in the aftermath, memories of earlier failures crept in: the moments where boundaries hadn't been enforced, the times when unconditional faith had clouded judgment. Allowing Evan to push, manipulate, and deceive had helped create the very monster I now faced. Accepting that truth was painful, but necessary. The decision that followed came with surprising ease. No more clinging to a legacy built on assumptions of loyalty that no longer existed. No more hoping for transformation that would never come. The future needed a new foundation, one crafted with intention, not desperation. The desk felt colder than usual as the new will took shape. Names were reconsidered, priorities realigned. Those who had stood by me faithfully, Daniel, longtime friends, charitable causes I had neglected, took the place once reserved for a son who had chosen a darker path. Signing the final page lifted a weight that had been lodged in my chest for years. A call from Daniel broke the moment. His voice carried the steady reassurance it always did. "It's done," he said. "The house is secure. The business is stable. You've made your move. Everything is in place." There was nothing more to say. The past had demanded enough words. The future required action. When the call ended, the silence in the room felt different, no longer oppressive, no longer tied to fear or uncertainty. The next chapter lay ahead, unbound from resentment, free from the chains of family betrayal. Evan had chosen his path long ago. Now I had chosen mine. Weeks had passed since the dust settled, since Evan's betrayal became public knowledge. Courts moved slowly, but their judgment was inevitable. His name, once tied to the future, envisioned for him, now surfaced only in conversations about scandal loss and ruin. Everything he tried to take had slipped through his fingers, and in the process, the son I once knew disappeared completely. The guilt that once gnawed at my conscience for failing to act sooner no longer held power. Regret had burned itself out. Acceptance took its place. With the truth finally confronted, breathing became easier, as though a weight that had lived on my chest for decades had finally lifted. A different version of myself began to emerge. Life had long revolved around duty, family, and success, the pillars defining every decision made. But those pillars had collapsed, shattered by the very hands meant to carry on the legacy. Oddly enough, in the ruins, something far more valuable revealed itself. The empire once treasured so fiercely no longer held meaning. What good were wealth and reputation if they demanded constant vigilance, fear, and suspicion? Evan's downfall, painful as it was, forced a reckoning. He had stripped away illusions I clung to, leaving room for something less fragile, purpose, integrity, and a life unburdened by appearances. No need remained to prove anything to anyone. The world no longer required pleasing. The constant game of image and reputation had ended, leaving space for something honest. Rebuilding could finally begin without the weight of expectation pressing down. Richard Daniel said one afternoon, as he walked into the study, his steps steady and familiar. "You've done the right thing." The tone carried no pity, just understanding. After everything that had unraveled, wholeness still felt distant, yet Daniel's unwavering presence brought something close to peace. "Is it over?" The question left my lips before I could stop it. "Is everything truly done?" A nod. "It's over. Evan's been caught, the will has been changed, the house secured. You can breathe now. You can start living again." There was no triumphant victory in his words, only a gentle acknowledgement that one chapter had finally ended. No dramatic showdown, no final confrontation. The stack of documents on the desk held my gaze. All of it," I murmured. "I don't need it anymore." Daniel didn't ask for clarification. He didn't need to. The mansion, the accounts, the company, the remnants of a life built upon fragile foundations, none of it mattered now. Years chasing status had led only to emptiness, relationships neglected, priorities misplaced. A decision formed with startling clarity: leave it all behind. Not a rash impulse. Every angle had been considered, every memory sifted through. Staying in that house surrounded by ghosts of the past served no purpose. Something new, something real was needed. "It's time to move on," I told Daniel, folding the documents with a steadiness that surprised even me. "Time for something different." His small, sincere smile held more pride than words could express. "You've earned it." Preparations unfolded quickly. The house went on the market. Funds were shifted toward more meaningful causes. The wealth that once served only one family would soon support many. What shape that generosity would take remained uncertain, but the intention was firm: build something better than what had been inherited. Thoughts drifted to people overlooked along the way, individuals who had reached out in need, while I chased success with blinders on. A chance to mend, to give, to rebuild the parts of myself lost in ambition now stood within reach. Daniel didn't require an explanation. Some things didn't need to be spoken aloud. Months of travel followed each destination, peeling away another layer of the past. Freedom took shape slowly, not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of waking up without fear of what Evan might do next. The absence he left behind hurt, but not for the reasons expected. It wasn't the loss of a son that cut deepest. It was the realization that his betrayal had defined too much of my life. Reclaiming my identity became the real victory, no longer chained to his choices, no longer waiting for redemption that would never come. The path forward grew clearer. Hatred had no place in this new life. Neither did vengeance. Evan's journey now belonged to him alone, shaped entirely by decisions he had made. Our paths had diverged irrevocably. A small apartment in the city became home, a modest space, but one that felt clean of the past. For the first time in years, contentment settled in easily. Peace, purpose, a future not dictated by fear or betrayal. That was all that remained necessary. And in the end, it proved to be more than enough.